Well, yesterday at the end there was the use of the word, well, how I pronounce it, labification. There is in it such a labification of all principle as may be injurious to morality. This is referring to Beggar's Opera. Well, apparently that word is pronounced labifaction. I don't know how exactly. And it means downfall, in case anyone is curious. It's spelled Labefactation, in case you're curious. Anyway, while he pronounced this response, we said in a comical sort of restraint, smothering a laugh which we were afraid might burst out. In his life of Gay, he had been still more decisive as to the inefficiency of the Beggar's Opera in corrupting society. But I have ever thought somewhat differently, for indeed not only are the gaiety and heroism of a highwayman very captivating to a youthful imagination, but the arguments for adventurous depredation are so plausible, the illusion so lively, and the contrasts with the ordinary and more painful modes of acquiring property are so artfully displayed, that it requires a cool and strong judgment to resist so imposing an aggregate. Yet I own I should be very sorry to have the Beggar's Opera suppressed, for there is in it so much of real London life, so much brilliant wit, and such a variety of airs which, from early association of ideas, engage, soothe, and enliven the mind, that no performance which the theatre exhibits delights me more. The late quote-unquote worthy Duke of Queensberry, as Thomson in his Seasons justly characterizes him, told me that when Gay first showed him the Beggar's Opera, let me reread that sentence. The late quote-unquote worthy Duke of Queensberry, as Thomson in his Seasons justly characterizes him, told me that when Gay first showed him the Beggar's Opera, his grace observation was, "This is a very odd thing, Gay. I am satisfied that it is either a very good thing or a very bad thing." It proved the former beyond the warmest expectations of the author or his friends. Mr. Cambridge, however, showed us today that there was good reason enough to doubt concerning its success. He was told by Quinn that during the first night of its appearance it was long in a very dubious state, that there was a disposition to damn it, and that it was saved by the song, "O ponder well, be not severe." The audience being much affected by the innocent look of Polly when she came to those two lines, which exhibit at once a painful and ridiculous image, "For on the rope there hangs, my dear, depends poor Polly's life." Quinn himself had so bad an opinion of it that he refused the part of Captain Macheath and gave it to Walker, who acquired a great celebrity by his grave yet animated performance of it. So if you haven't looked up the Beggar's Opera, you might want to do that to figure out what they're talking about. For myself, I did open the Wikipedia page, but it was kind of long, so I didn't get into it yet. But I'll return to it, I think. Anyway, we talked of a young gentleman's marriage with an eminent singer. A later footnote tells us this is R.B. Sheridan and Elizabeth Linley. And his determination that she should no longer sing in public, though his father was very earnest that she should, because her talents would be liberally rewarded, so as to make her a good fortune. It was questioned whether the young gentleman, who had not a shilling in the world, but was blessed with very uncommon talents, was not foolishly delicate or foolishly proud, and his father truly rational without being mean. Johnson, with all the high spirit of a Roman senator, exclaimed, "He resolved wisely and nobly, to be sure. He is a brave man. Would not a gentleman be disgraced by having his wife singing publicly for hire? No, sir, there can be no doubt here. I know not if I should not prepare myself for public singer as readily as let my wife be one." Johnson arraigned the modern politics of this country as entirely devoid of all principles of whatever kind. "Politics," said he, "are now nothing more than means of rising in the world. With this sole view do men engage in politics, and their whole conduct proceeds upon it. How different in that respect is that state of the nation now from what it was in the time of Charles I, during the usurpation and after the restoration in the times of Charles II. Hudibras affords a strong proof how much hold political principles had then upon the minds of men. There is in Hubridas a great deal of bullion which will always last, but to be sure the brightest strokes of his wit owed their force to the impression of his characters, which was upon men's minds at the time, to their knowing them, at table and in the street. In short, being familiar with them, and above all to his satire being directed against those whom a little while before they had hated and feared. The nation in general has ever been loyal, has been at all times attached to the monarch, though a few daring rebels have been wonderfully powerful for a time. The murder of Charles I was undoubtedly not committed with the approbation of consent of the people. Had there been the case, Parliament would not have ventured to consign the regicides to their deserved punishment. And we know what exuberances of joy there was when Charles II was restored. If Charles II had been all his mind to it, had made it his sole object, he might have been an absolute as Louis XIV. A gentleman, footnote here tells us it's Boswell, talking about himself in the third person again. A gentleman, quote-unquote, observed he would have done no harm if he had. Johnson answered, "Why, sir, absolute princes seldom do any harm. But they who are governed by them are governed by chance. There is no security for good government." Cambridge said, "There have been many sad victims to absolute power." Johnson said, "So, sir, have there been to popular factions." Well, that's fair enough. Boswell, I said, "The question is, which is worse, one wild beast or many?" That is the question. Johnson praised The Spectator, particularly the character of Sir Roger de Coverley. He said, "Sir Roger did not die a violent death, as has been generally fancied. He was not killed. He died only because others were to die, and because his death afforded an opportunity to Addison for some very fine writing. We have the example of Cervantes making Don Quixote die. I never could see why Sir Roger is represented as a little cracked. It appears to me that the story of the widow was intended to have something superinduced upon it, but the superstructure did not come." Somebody, footnote here says this is Reynolds, found fault with writing verses in a dead language, maintaining that they were merely arrangements of so many words, and laughed at the universities of Oxford and Cambridge for sending forth collections of them not only in Greek and Latin, but even in Syriac, Arabic, and other more unknown tongues. Johnson answered, "I would have as many of these as possible. I would have verses in every language that there are the means of acquiring. Nobody imagines that an university is to have at once 200 poets, but it should be able to show 200 scholars. Fiersick's death was lamented, I think, in 40 languages, and I would have had every coronation and every death of a king, every Gaudium and every Luctus, university verses, and in as many languages as can be acquired. I would have the world to be thus told, here is a school where everything may be learned." Having sent out next day on a visit to the Earl of Pembroke at Woolton, and to my friend Mr. Temple at Mamhead in Devonshire, and not having returned to town till the 2nd of May, I did not see Dr. Johnson for a considerable time, and during the remaining part of my stay in London kept very perfect notes of his conversation, which had I, according to my usual custom, written out at large soon after the time, much might have been preserved, which is now irretrievably lost. I can now only record some particular scenes and a few fragments of his memorabilia. But to make some amends for my relaxation of diligence in one respect, I have to present my readers with arguments upon 2 law cases which he favored me. On Saturday, the 6th of May, we dined by ourselves at the Mitre, and he dictated to me what follows to obviate the complaint already mentioned, which had been made in the form of the action of the Court of Session by Dr. Meems of Aberdeen, that is in the same translation of a charter in which physicians were mentioned. He was called Doctor of Medicine. Why this guy is nitpicking about this and suing over it, he's only remembered now as being an idiot for doing that. Anyway, here's the quoted part. This is Johnson. This is Boswell's dictation of Johnson's speech on this topic. There are but two reasons for which a physician can decline the title of Doctor of Medicine: because he supposes himself disgraced by the doctorship, or supposes the doctorship disgraced by himself. To be disgraced by a title which he shares in common with every illustrious name of his profession, with Bohuv or Borhave, with Arthurnut, and with Cullen, can surely diminish no man's reputation. It is, I suppose, to the doctorate from which he shrinks that he owes his right of practicing, again spelled P-H-Y-S-I-C-K, but I will here pronounce it physics. Psychic instead of psychic. I mean, it means physician, I'm guessing, from back then. So maybe I'll just say physician instead of what it looks like. A doctor of medicine is a physician under the protection of the law and by the stamp of authority. The physician, who is not a doctor, usurps a profession and is authorized only by himself to decide upon health and sickness and life and death. That this gentleman is a doctor, his diploma makes evident. A diploma not obtruded upon him, but obtained by solicitation, and for which fees were paid. With what countenance any man could refute the title which he has either begged or bought is not easily discovered. Exactly. All verbal injury must compromise in either some false position or some unnecessary declaration of defamatory truth. That in calling him a doctor, a false appellation was given him, he himself will not pretend, who at the same time that he complains of the title, would be offended if we supposed him to be not a doctor. If the title of doctor be a defamatory truth, it is time to dissolve our colleges. For why should the public give salaries to men whose approbation is reproach? It may likewise deserve that notice of the public to consider what help can be given to the professors of physicians, who all share with this unhappy gentleman the ignominious appellation, and of whom the very boys in the street are not afraid to say, "There goes the doctor." What is implied by the term doctor is well known. It distinguishes him to whom it is granted as a man who has attained such knowledge of his profession as qualifies him to instruct others. A doctor of laws is a man who can form lawyers by his precepts. A doctor of medicine is a man who can teach the art of curing diseases. There is an old axiom which no man has yet thought of fit to deny: nil dat quod non habet. No one can give what he lacks. Upon this principle, to be doctor implies skill, for nemo docet quod non didicit. No one can teach what he has not learned. In England, whoever practices physicians or physics, not being a doctor, must practice by a license, but the doctorate conveys a license in itself. By what accident it happens that he and the other physicians were mentioned in different terms, where the terms themselves were equivalent, or where, in effect, that which was applied to him was the more honorable, perhaps they who wrote the paper cannot now remember. Had they expected a lawyer to have been the consequence of such petty variation, I hope they would have avoided it. But probably, as they means no ill, they suspected no danger, and therefore consulted only what appeared to them propriety or convenience. Footnote here. In justice to Dr. Memis, though I was against him as an advocate, I must mention that he objected to the variation very earnestly before the translation was printed off. Okay. A few days afterwards, I consulted him upon a cause, Patterson and others, against Alexander and others, which had been decided by a casting vote in the Court of Session, determining that the corporation of Stirling was corrupt, and setting aside the election of some of their offices because it was proved that 3 of the leading men who influenced the majority had entered into an unjustifiable compact, of which, however, the majority were ignorant. He dictated to me, after a little consideration, the following sentences upon this subject. There is a difference between majority and superiority. Majority is applied to a number, and superiority to power. And power, like many other things, is to be estimated non numero sed ponderare, not by number but by weight. Now, though the greater number is now not corrupt, the greater weight is corrupt, so that corruption predominates in the borough taken collectively, though perhaps taken numerically, the greater part may be uncorrupt. That borough, which is so constituted as to act corruptly, is in the eye of reason corrupt, whether it be by the uncontrollable power of a few or by an accidental pravity of the multitude. The objection in which is urged the injustice of making the innocent suffer with the guilty is an objection not only against society, but against the possibility of society. All societies, great and small, subsist upon this condition, that as the individuals derive advantages from union, they may likewise suffer inconveniences. That as those who do nothing, and sometimes those who do ill, will have the honors and emulates of general virtue and general prosperity, so those likewise who do nothing, or perhaps do well, must be involved in the consequences of predominant corruption. Good point. This, is my opinion, was a very nice case, but the decision was affirmed in the House of Lords. Well, I'm going to leave it at that, because the next day is Monday, May 8th, so might as well start with a new day tomorrow. Till next time, bye from Boswell.